The ranger who worked at the forest station before me left in a hurry. She didn't explain why. She didn't say goodbye. She only handed me a piece of paper with 3 rules written on it. The first rule said, if the forest ever goes completely silent at 3 in the morning, I should start humming. Because if I didn't, something in the woods would start saying my name. And by then, it already knew where I was. Some stories don't end when the lights go out. Some linger in the quiet places between waking and sleep. Welcome to Ethereal Echoes. Here you'll find slow-burning psychological thrillers and atmospheric stories meant to be experienced in the dark. New episodes are released every Wednesday and Friday. And if you'd prefer to listen without ads and hear new stories early, you can join us on Patreon. For now, settle in, get comfortable, and let the world fade away. Tonight's story begins in a remote forest ranger station where the woman before me left 3 rules, and none of them made sense until the forest went silent. The highway fell away behind me in bright, familiar slabs, and the last needle of cell service vanished with it. One final bar, flickering and dead. I was alone with the motor's constant hum and periodic nervous blink of the check engine light, weaving through a vein of country roads so narrow it felt sketched rather than paved. Beyond the windshield, the woods gathered, pines packed shoulder to shoulder, their somber green boughs spilling into one another overhead and knitting together against the mist which bled across the tar like the milky whites of a bruised eye. I kept the window cracked, enough to let the air in, clean but spiked with metallic tang of decay, a wet iron perfume that kept my mind sharp and my teeth on edge. I drove with one hand, the other keeping company with the envelope on the passenger seat, where the directions had been printed in black, rigid strokes. The last favor I'd wrung out of the city before turning my back on it. It sat next to a paper cup gone cold and slick with condensation, and a zipped double filled with the sum of my new existence. Sometimes I reached for the cup, sometimes the envelope, as if by touch alone I could choose between being awake or being lost. Relief was a flavor, faint and bitter as pennyroyal, that I rolled against the roof of my mouth. I was supposed to feel it. Fresh start, blank page, the quieting of the relentless internal din. And I did. But it moved through me in thin ribbons, bright and gone before it reached my gut. The rest of me was a tense, stitched mass of other feelings. Muscle memory, dread, the feeling of being watched, the slow dawning suspicion that the very air had breath. I should have been used to it, being stalked by my own story, but I wasn't. The road wound deeper, each curve steeper than the last, until I was hemmed in on both sides by moss-dark trunks and the claws of undergrowth. The car shuddered as it scraped a rut. The sound of brief, metallic shriek swallowed instantly by endless hush of green. I looked at the GPS. Signal, dead. The map now a blank square and a spinning, idiot arrow. I swore, softly, in the defiance of the trees, and reached for the envelope, propping it against the steering wheel as I coasted to a stop. There were 3 turns left to make, and they all would be unmarked. I counted them off as I went, repeating each in my head like a spell. Right at the power line, left at the blackened log, right again at the single white birch. As the miles slid by, the forest seemed to lean closer, trunks thickening, shadows congulating. The mist grew denser, clinging to the car in cold skeins. Every so often, I thought I saw movement, something looping parallel to my route, pale flashes between the trees, but I told myself it was just nerves, or a deer, or nothing at all. The final hill came out of nowhere, a sudden rise as abrupt as a memory, and my poor old Subaru wheezed up in low gear, protesting with every shudder of the engine. The tire spat gravel, and for a moment I felt the sick, weightless lift of a near stall. Then the woods broke, and I rolled out into a clearing cut so precise it looked categorized, the wound of civilization pink and raw against the surrounding wilds. There, at the far end of the lot, stood the station. Not a tower, not a fortress, just a long, low cabin built out of gray wood and shingles that curled like old scabs. A line of solar panels ran along the roof, their glassy surfaces catching what little light filtered down, turning it into something more useful than beauty. And on the porch, framed by a chain rail and a battered wind chime, waited the outgoing ranger. She stood as if at attention, hands gripped hard around the banister, body held in a line so rigid it looked painful. Her uniform fit loose, the sleeves too long, and her hat shadowed her face almost completely. I saw her eyes, though, sharp, glass blue, darting from the car to the tree line and back again with animal frequency. I killed the engine and sat for a moment, letting the silence surge in. It wasn't truly silent, not with the woods, but the way the noise here was different than anywhere I'd been. It was layered, a kind of living white noise. The hush of needles underfoot, the spatter of rain on bark, the deep, arrhythmic creaks as the forest shifted in its sleep. Underneath all that, I heard my own pulse, faster than it should be, and the quick, unsteady breathing of the woman on the porch. When I opened the door, the cold slapped my skin like a parent with too much to do. I stepped out, boots crunching over a lattice of fallen twigs, and drew a deep, deliberate breath. The air here was thick, alive with the musk of pitch and old leaves, tinged with the faint ammonia bite of animal. My breath came back to me in vaporous curls. I tasted something coppery on my tongue. The outgoing ranger didn't move. She just watched, her focus flickering from me to the forest and back again, even as I made my slow approach. Dragging my duffel behind, she kept her body angled towards the woods. It was like she was waiting for something to breach the perimeter, and I was a distant, secondary concern. I paused at the bottom of the steps, unsure of protocol. The job packet had described a formal handoff, but the specifics were left vague. Maybe a handshake, a signature, or something more ceremonial. The silence stretched. "I'm Alara," I said, my voice too loud in the clear, cold air. Her head jerked up, the movement bird-like and abrupt. "You're early," she said. The sound of it was wrong, too taut, as if every word costed her something. I shrugged. Traffic was lighter than expected. She nodded almost imperceptibly. "Suppose that's good." I waited for her to come down the steps, to offer a hand or a smile, but she just hovered there, one foot braced behind the other. Her eyes darted to the trees again, and for the first time I felt the hair rise along my forearms. "It's all ready," she said, voice clipped. "Cabin stocked, equipment's charged. There's—" She paused, as if uncertain how much to reveal. "There's a binder with procedures by the desk, and a radio. You'll want to keep it on at all times." I nodded, half expecting a warning or a joke about bears, but she didn't give me either. "I'll walk you in," she said at last, her grip on the banister tightening. I followed her up the steps, feeling the way the wood flexed and groaned beneath my weight. The porch was scattered with old boots, empty mugs, and a scatter of feathered bones, crow or jay, stripped clean and left as a mute warning. The wind chimes rattled, the sounds thin and anxious. She led me inside, the door opening on a long, narrow hallway that stank of pine cleaner and something meatier underneath. The interior was spare, but functional. A line of battered chairs, a wall of cubbies, a map pinned with so many thumbtacks it looked like a polka dot infection. The kitchen glimmered with steel, the counters scoured raw by use. Every surface was so clean it felt like an apology. At the end of the hall, she gestured to the left. "Your room's through there. I didn't touch your things." There was a bitterness to the word things, as if it was foreign and slightly distasteful. I peered inside. A cot, a battered trunk, a shelf with a few field guides, a window crusted with condensation of old, unvoiced sighs. "You'll want to close the drapes after dark," she added, eyes skittering away. "It helps." "Helps with what?" But she ignored the question. She led me back to the kitchen, pulling out a chair at the battered oak table. She sat, at last, but perched on the edge as though ready to bolt. I hesitated, then joined her. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Outside, the wind shivered through the chinks in the walls, and I could hear the slow, methodical peck of a woodpecker somewhere distant. My mind drifted to the road behind me, the city I'd fled, the feelings of being chased and never quite caught. She broke the silence first. "You'll see things," she said, her tone so flat it bordered on bored. "Hear things. Most of it's nothing. The rest—" She trailed off, tracing a finger along the scarred table. "You'll figure it out." I searched her face for a hint of humor, or even malice, but there was nothing, just exhaustion, ground deep into the lines around her mouth. She seemed like someone who had been warned about something, and then found out it was much, much worse. "You're not staying?" I asked. She shook her head. "Contract's up. I leave at dusk." A heavy quiet settled between us. I studied the room, counting the ways in and out, the places a person could hide. I thought of the mist outside, the way it swallowed up the headlights, and the sense of being smothered in someone else's dream. "Any last advice?" I said, trying to lighten with a smile. It came out wrong. More of a plea. She looked at me. Finally, really looked at me. And for a second, her blue eyes softened. Don't forget to sleep. That's when they try their hardest. I didn't ask who they were. I didn't want to know. I just nodded, picking at the cuff of my jacket, and tried to memorize the feeling of the room. The sound of the wind and wood, the taste of the fear surrounding the back of my throat, the way her hand trembled as she reached for her own coffee cup. When she stood, the chair scraped the floor with a sound like bone on bone. She walked past me, down the hallway, and out onto the porch. Leaving the door ajar, I followed slow and hesitant. She paused on the steps, eyes raking the edge of the woods. The sun, such as it was, had faded to a dull bruise, and the mist was thicker, curling around our ankles like something alive. "Good luck, Alara," she said, not even turning back. Then she was gone, boots crunching over the hard-packed earth, her silhouette fading into the gray. I watched until she vanished completely, and then turned my gaze to the woods, the trees crowding the clearing, the sense of old secrets pressing close. Above me, the wind chime rattled again, less a song than a warning. I hugged my duffel close to my chest, closing the door behind me. Let the forest come. I was listening. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. My body lay down on the cot, too narrow, just shy of supporting my shoulder span, and my bones made the same creaks as the bed frame. But the rest of me stayed up, alert and buzzing. The station held its warmth too well, trapping the scent of pine cleaner and scorched metal and sweat. I pressed my face into my pillow and found it heavy with someone else's exhale. At first light, I heard the return of the outgoing ranger. Her boots clomped up the porch with a dodged military rhythm, then paused at the threshold as if though waiting for permission to enter. I opened the door before she could knock. She startled, just a flinch, but enough to confirm what I already suspected about her state. In daylight, I could see her better, older than I'd guessed, her skin drawn, paper-thin, against the sharp bones of her face, hands quivering as they clutched a battered thermos. Her name tag read, Meredith, and the letters were worn to a ghostly outline. "I thought you left," I said, my own voice sounding strange in the hush. "Had to double-check the readings. Protocol." She said it if by rote, the way that people recite incantations they don't believe in, but don't dare stop uttering. She pushed past me and set the thermos down on the counter, then immediately started herding me around the station, as if my presence was an irritant she could scrub away with the sheer force of efficiency. "This is the comm desk. Emergency bands are present. You keep the radio charged at all times, no exceptions, even at night." She slapped the top of the battered black radio. It spat out a brief, static-laden burst of sound and then fell silent. "We log the weather 3 times a day. Don't fudge the numbers. It's important." I nodded, but she wasn't looking at me. Her gaze skittered over every surface, double-checking, triple-checking. She opened the fridge, contents lined up with military precision, and then the cabinet over the sink, fingers grazing each label as if reacquainting herself with an old lover. She showed me the kitchenette. "Don't trust the water after heavy rain. It tastes off. Boil it first." And the tiny closet where the cleaning supplies lived. "Bleach keeps the bugs away. You'll need more by next supply run." The bathroom, was less of a room and more of a confession. A sliver of space with a cracked plastic basin and a shower that operated on its own caprices. Hot water's limited, she said. You get maybe 1-2 real showers a week. Cold works, but it's unpleasant. Do not use it at night. I waited for the list of wildlife warnings, the usual stories about wolves or black bears, or the infamous moose with a grudge. But she only glanced at the window and said, "Keep these closed after dark." She stopped in the main room, one hand bracing against the wall as if she might collapse. Then she rummaged in her vest and produced a ring of keys, which she pressed in my palm with unexpected force. "These are yours now," she said. "All locks match." "Thank you," I said, but the words came out formal, as if I was already a distant echo. Then she handed me a folded sheet of paper, the edges softened by sweat and constant folding. "This too." I opened it. 3 rules written in the same hard-angled hand as my directions. 1. If the forest goes silent at 3 a.m., hum until you hear the wind return. 2. If you see a face in the mirror that isn't yours, turn out every light and wait until sunrise. 3. If you hear your name called from the tree line, do not answer. Do not go outside. I stared at the rules, then at Meredith. She watched me with a blank, abroaded patience of someone who's been told the same jokes 1,000 times and never gotten a laugh. "Is this some hazing thing?" I asked, aiming for a smile, but my lips only managed a thin, bloodless line. She didn't smile back. "Just follow them, please." The word "please" did more to unnerve me than the list itself. It was hollow, brittle, a plea from a woman not used to pleading. I tried again. "Are you serious?" "The forest?" She cut me off. "Just follow them," she repeated. Her voice quivered on the edge of cracking, but she caught it before it broke. "It's not a joke. Not for me." There was silence that felt like a held breath, and she turned away. I followed her to the door, keys and rules in my hand. She stood on the porch, staring at the mist as it combed slow fingers through the clearing. Her car, an ancient mud-slathered Jeep, was already packed. I hadn't noticed it before, in the way some things only come into focus when they're about to vanish. She hesitated at the steps, her hands tightening on the strap of her bag. "Lock up before dusk," she said. "Don't forget." Will I see you again?" I asked, surprising both of us. She didn't even turn around. "You won't want to." Then she hurried down the stairs, boots skidding on wet wood. She yanked open her car door and climbed in, reversing so violently that pebbles spat against the station siding. I watched her taillights smear into the fog, and then nothing but the slow, stubborn return of the forest's green hush. I stood on the porch, the rules vibrating in my grip, until the chill worked its way through my layers, and I couldn't tell if I was shaking from the cold or something else. I looked down at the clearing, where the tires had churned the earth to mud. The wind had already begun to erase the tracks. The mist swelled, licking at my boots and ankles, and the woods inhaled and held, waiting. I went inside, locked the door behind me, and sat at the kitchen table. I read the rules again, fingers tracing the path of each letter, as if by memorizing them I could render the inner. 3 a.m., faces in the glass, voices in the night. I set the paper next to my coffee cup and tried to laugh at myself, but the sound was small and unfamiliar, like a bird hitting a window in the middle of the night. The station groaned around me, settling into its new arrangement, its new caretaker. I shivered and waited for the sun to move. For a while, I did what people do when they're left to themselves in a new place. I arranged my life into tidy, defensible piles, the devil's contents, 3 changes of clothes, a few books, a half-dead laptop, were all deployed with an almost ceremonial type of care. Socks rolled and stacked, toiletries aligned by height, a single photograph taped to the interior of the locker so I could pretend at some deeper domesticity. I wiped down every surface with a vinegar-scented cloth, as if by erasing Meredith's fingerprints I could neutralize her fear. Outside, the mist burned off by noon, replaced by the flat, gray hunger of high clouds. Light in the forest was never sharp, always filtered and uncertain, like the world was suspended in a jar of dirty water. From the kitchen window, I watched the tree line shift and settle, the branches twisting and twitching in the wind I couldn't feel. Once I thought I saw a person, flash of tan and flannel, same as mine. But when I looked again, there was only a motion of a young buck, antlers still fuzzy and tender. After lunch, an energy bar, some instant coffee, and the last of the city's sweet cream in a plastic thimble, I made a survey of the monitoring equipment. The station's heart was the comm desk, a battered PC, a radio with a duct-taped antenna, and a tangle of wires that would have confounded a lesser mind. Above it, a row of battered binders chronicled decades of weather, fire risk, and personnel complaints. I flicked through them, finding Meredith's notes dense and clinical. Her handwriting changed, though, sharper, more frantic in the last few weeks. Some pages bore little etchings in the margins, tallies, glyphs, face split into 2 halves, one smiling, one howling. I checked the sensors. Barometer, thermometer, Geiger counter, all green. The fire watch log was all up to date. The path camera running. It was a job that required you to notice small shifts, the way one shadow lengthens while another shrinks, or how the temperature changes a hair before a storm. I'd always been good at that, seeing the patterns that most people missed. At 2, I filled out the daily forms and emailed my first report to the regional office. I didn't mention the rules. I didn't mention the tremor in Meredith's hand or the way her voice lost itself when she talked about the night. Those things didn't fit into the drop-down menus or radio checkboxes. After, I unfolded the paper and read the 3 rules again. My fingers traced the indentations, feeling the violence of the pen strokes, each word pressed so hard it dented the wood of the table beneath. It was tempting to dismiss it all as cabin fever or a joke on stale, but the sincerity of Meredith's terror lingered. It clung to the air, to the marrow of the station. 3 a.m., mirrors, voices. 3 a.m. Mirrors. Voices. 3 a.m. Mirrors. Voices. When my anxiety peaked, I went outside, locking the door behind me. A habit, not yet a need. I walked the perimeter of the clearing, boots scuffing up old needles of clotted earth. The woods pressed close, their darkness a living thing. The sun, such as it was, hung low and anemic behind a mesh of branches. The path markers stood out as a raw cut of orange tape, wound high around the thickest trunks. I followed them with my eyes, then my feet, until I found the first trailhead, a sign, half rotted and riddled with insect borers, read North Observation in faded block letters. Beyond it, the path was a little more than a scratch in the ground, swallowed almost instantly by the crowding of trees. I didn't go far. The sense of being watched, not just seen, but assessed, measured, kept me anchored to the edge of the clearing. A squirrel cackled from overhead, then dropped a pine cone as if aiming for my skull. I ducked and laughed. The sound startled me, too loud, too alive in my hush. My nerves hummed like power lines. From a distance, I studied the observation tower. It was a lopsided skeleton rising above the treetops, its platform warped by the seasons of sun and wind and the patient gnawing of beetles. A spiral of iron stairs led up its side, the railing stripped of paint and slick with lichen. At this hour, the tower was just a silhouette against the sky, empty and waiting. I promised myself I'd go up before dusk, log a weather check, get a lay of the land. For now, I walked the circumference of the clearing 3 times, making note of every oddity: a tangle of feathers at the base of a cedar, the first shaped growths of a burl fungus, a scattering of stones arranged into a rough, deliberate circle. There was no sign of bears, or wolves, or anything larger than a dog, but everywhere I looked, the needles carpeted the ground too thickly, swallowing footprints before they formed. As the evening bled into the canopy, the wind sharpened. The trees grew restless, their upper branches flexing against one another with the sound of wet silk being torn. The station siding groaned under the pressure, the wind fogged and unseeing. I lingered on the porch, watching the blue of twilight dissolve into the bruised, colored dark. That's when the forest's true voice woke up. First the insects, a phalanx of crickets. Their songs relentless and metallic, sawing through the heavy air. The frogs hidden deep in some unseen lowland, their calls low and expectant. Birds joined in, fewer but sharper. Jays shrieking as if to warn away the night. Beneath it all, the constant, arrhythmic thud of something big moving deep among the trees, pacing, turning, then standing perfectly still. I watched for a moment, half hoping for the return of the deer, but the only shapes I saw were shadows thickening, merging, splitting again in the gloom. The tower was lost to the dark. Its presence felt more than seen. I stood outside, longer than I meant to. The woods were louder than any city street I'd ever known, the din building with each minute as if the creatures of the forest had wagered on who could outlast the other. It was overwhelming. It was beautiful. It was, in some primal way, entirely wrong. When my eyes began to water from the cold, I went inside and locked the door. The rules were still on the table, waiting for me. I read them a final time before folding them neatly and tucking them under my pillow, like a ward against the stories I didn't want to dream. I made dinner, instant noodles and a square of chocolate, washed up and checked the radio. Static. Then a brief burst of numbers from the nearest station, the voice so faint it sounded like a memory. Nothing from the outside world, and nothing from Meredith. I walked the halls of the station one more time, turning off lights as I went. When I reached the bathroom, I caught my reflection in the mirror. Just a glimpse, a flash of movement, and for a moment, it seemed like I was being watched from the other side. A face not quite my own. Eyes gone too wide, too bright. I switched off the light, heart thudding in my chest. In the bedroom, I lay on my back, staring at the slatted ceiling, trying to sync my breath with the noises outside. It was a losing battle. The woods had their own tempo, alien and inescapable. As the night thickened, the sounds grew louder, then stranger. The crickets faltered in unison, like a choir cut off mid-note. The frogs held a single, long croak before dropping silent. Then, from somewhere close by, the soft but insistent click of nails or claws dragging across the wood. I thought about the rules. I thought about the woman who'd left them, and the fear that lived inside her like a second heart. I shut my eyes and let the dark seep in, one slow breath at a time. Night in the station was not a blanket, but a tide, and it rose quick and cold, clawing up the walls and into the seams of my clothes. The first hour after dusk, I tried to busy myself. I checked the locks, tidied the desk, paged through a field guide until the words slipped off the page and pooled at my feet like syrup. I made another cup of coffee, then another, the bitterness burning a line down my throat and into the hollow where my nerves like to breathe. Every few minutes, I glanced at the comm radio, daring it to break the silence with anything but static. It never did. The solar lights were supposed to hold a charge through the night, but just after 10, they began to falter. First, a slow pulse, then a twitchy stutter, like the cabin itself was struggling to keep its eyes open. Each flicker carved new, crueler shadows into the corners of the room, elongating the ordinary things, chairs, coats, mugs, into grotesque marionette versions of themselves. In the bathroom, the mirror turned into a slab of old ice, and I avoided it with a child's stubbornness. Outside, the forest shed its skin, the noise worse than before. The cricket's metallic thrum layered under the shrill peal of something vain and furious, punctuated by the bark of a fox or the guttural laugh of a barred owl. Once, I heard the unmistakable crack of a large branch somewhere close, and I froze, mid-step, convinced for a moment that Meredith was outside, and that she returned to warn me of something she had forgotten to say. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass of the window, but all I saw was the churn of black and blue, the edge of the porch swallowed in the mist and movement. It was impossible to tell if I was awake or dreaming. Every time I tried to lie down, my body kept inventing new pains. an itch inside my ribs, a numbness in my feet, the faint but insistent pressure of my fingers at the back of my neck. I moved through the rooms, unable to rest, my reflection trailing me in every darkened pane. Sometimes I caught it looking back, just a shade off, always with that little, knowing smile. At 11:47, I checked all the locks again, then shoved a chair under the knob of the main door, the way I'd seen in the movies and in the worst nights of my old apartment. I took the rules from beneath my pillow and set them on my nightstand, soothing the creases with the heel of my hand. Then I set an alarm on my watch, 2:55, fingers trembling so badly I had to enter it twice. I tried to remember the last time I had felt safe in the dark. The memory refused to come. I lay on my side, knees curled, the rules, a flat white moon on the table beside me. Through the thin walls, the sounds pressed in until it was impossible to know where the cabin ended and the night began. The world outside had become a single, breathing animal, awake, hungry, aware of me. The first hour stretched like a limb after a wound. I closed my eyes, but the noises only sharpened, each click or rustle exploding against the bones of my skull. I tried to focus on the patterns, the way the crickets would surge, then fall, then rise again, always in the same offbeat rhythm. It was almost soothing until I realized the sequence wasn't random at all. It repeated exactly every 21 seconds. A perfect loop. I sat up, heart thudding, and I tried to convince myself that I'd miscounted. I opened the field guide to the insect section and read it front to back, looking for a species that might act like this, but none did. The nearest explanation was a territorial call, or perhaps a warning. The book's glossy pages stuck to my fingertips, damp with sweat. I stared at the ceiling, counting each throb of sound, letting them accumulate until they formed a shape I could almost touch. Around 2 a.m, I thought I heard a voice under the drone, a low, breathy murmur, right at the threshold of hearing, like someone speaking through a cloth. "Alara," it said. Not too loud, not even particularly urgent, but the sound uncorked something deep in my chest, a fizz of ancient fear I hadn't tasted since childhood. I squeezed my eyes shut and told myself I was dreaming, that voices in the dark were just the brain eating its own tail. The next time, it was clearer. My name, once, then nothing. The crickets kept their rhythm, never missing a beat. I lay there frozen until my alarm vibrated on the bedside table and I gasped. Loud, a drowning woman's breath. My hand shook as I clicked it off. The rules loomed in the glow of the dying lamp. If the forest goes silent at 3 a.m., hum until you hear the wind return. The crickets were still going strong. I watched the digital clock, feeling every second pass through my teeth. 2:56, 2:57, 2:58. My tongue felt huge and clumsy in my mouth. I rehearsed a song, anything to break the tension, but my mind went blank. all the childhood lullabies replaced by static and the hiss of fear. 2:59. I stood and padded to the kitchen for water. The tap gurgled, then spat. Behind me, in the main room, the lights cut out entirely. Not a fade, just a sudden, absolute dark. I waited, listening. The crickets whirled. I filled the glass and drank the cold, hitting my stomach with a violence that made me shudder. The clock's display glowed from across the room. 3 o'clock. The sound stopped. The silence was total. An erasure so complete it felt like a punch. Even my breath seemed to hesitate, unsure if it was allowed. I went rigid, water glass trembling in my hand. For a few seconds, 10, maybe 20, there was nothing. No wind, no frogs, not even the creaking of the station settling. A low, tremulous pressure began to build in my ears, as if the world was sucking in a breath and waiting for me to do the same. I tried to remember the song my mother used to hum, back when I was small and the dark was just a dark. The melody drifted through my memory, soft, circular, the words long since dissolved. I opened my lips and let out air, humming as gently as I could. The noises sounded tiny, desperate, almost childlike in the void. The hum wavered. The pressure in my head spiked. For a moment, I thought I saw a shadow slide along the kitchen wall, a shape with too many arms, or perhaps none at all. But when I blinked, it was gone. I kept humming, louder now, the tune more a vibration than a song. My throat ached with the effort. And then, all at once, the wind came back. It rushed against the walls, a mad scramble of needles and grit, the station groaning in its grips. The lights flickered, then buzzed weakly to life. And then came the noise. Crickets, frogs, the howl of a distant something, like the world had been put back in its groove. I dropped the glass. It shattered, spraying water in shards across the floor. My knees buckled, and I slumped against the counter, hands pressed to my chest. The rules were right. I crawled back to the cot, blanket clutched to my chin, and stared into the dim until the sky turned milk blue with dawn. The woods outside seemed less menacing now, just trees and earth and the normal, everyday wild. But I knew it was waiting. I knew it had learned my name. When I finally closed my eyes, the lullaby was still on my lips, but the words, whatever they had been, were gone. All that remained was the hum.